Somewhere in Asia, the wrong pig fucked the wrong bat. Because today we're talking about 2011's Contagion, directed by Steven Soderbergh. The Black Death ended up wiping out between 30 and 60% of the entire population of Europe, but it only took Covid-19 within a year to reach even the most isolated parts of the world. We all know this is down to the fact that the world is completely different nowadays. We're so linked up with the furthest reaches of the planet. All businesses in every country is linked to other businesses. Everything's linked up in a way it never was before. So pandemics, as we all know from the past couple of years, can spread so much quicker and easier. And this is beautifully portrayed in the opening sequences of Contagion, where we see over the beautiful score these little montages where you see people being around someone that has the virus and then going about their daily life, touching surfaces. Early on, the clever camera work lets us know that this is a disease that's passed on by the viral sheddings that are left in surfaces by contagious people. Even though the characters within the movie and the scientists don't find that out until a long time later, the audience is let in on what's going on straight away. And I just love these early sequences where you see people unknowingly going around spreading the virus and very quickly going from Hong Kong to London to different parts of America to all over the world. And before anyone's even died on screen, the cat is already out of the bag.
I didn't really want to watch a film about a virus in the middle of a pandemic, but I was like, let me watch this. And then it kind of, watching it now when we passed everything, it was kind of uncomfortable for me to view. It was like, it brought back horrible memories of like being on the train and slowly seeing everyone not starting off with masks to pick like slowly more people wearing masks. And then, you know, that bit where just before the first lockdown, I was speaking to my mate and like, do you think we'll go into lockdown? And then we did, and it was quite an uncomfortable watch, Declan, now.
But I found it to be a really cathartic experience watching it. For whatever reason, I really enjoyed the fact that a piece of fiction had so accurately predicted what it would be like. Not because of their own amazing guesswork. It's because they had the real scientific minds that made these sort of plans for the World Health Organizations or different governments consulting on the film to make sure it was as accurate as possible. It kind of reminded me of Threads, which is a BBC docudrama. It's kind of a movie, kind of a documentary, leans more towards a movie, more towards fiction. Its intention was to portray the outcome of a nuclear war as accurately as possible. It really reminds me of that in a lot of ways. It nearly feels like a factual account, except with an absolute star-studded A-list cast, most of which took virtually no money. It's interesting with films like this when you have a huge star-studded cast. It looks like, how did they get that together? And Steven Soderbergh, he can attract as good a cast as anyone in the business. But it's actually kind of easier with films like this because you have a big host of characters who ultimately share an hour and 40-minute movie. So a lot of them might only have 15-minute screen time. Matt Damon's the exception. He probably has the most. But, you know, Kate Winslet, I think she shot all her scenes in 10 days. Gwyneth Paltrow shot it all in about 5 days. And most of them didn't take any money for it at all. So it's actually easier to do movies like this where there's a huge cast, but no one's really sharing screen time. So it's really easy to work around everyone's schedule.
Because when I first watched it, the fact that it was Gwyneth Paltrow kind of went over my head. Because, as you said, she's so fleeting in it. Like, I wonder how they pitched it to her. Like, you are in this film, but you're the first one to get the virus. You start off in it coughing on the phone. You're not in it for long because you just drop down dead in the kitchen and then they cut your head off and examine your brain. And you're not going to get paid for this either. So I wondered why she would take it, but I guess people remember it from it. Do you know what I mean?
Well, two main reasons. First of all, Steven Soderbergh's one of those directors where actors will walk over hot coals to get in one of his films. They love him. They know it's like he's amazing. Secondly, actors have long periods where they're not necessarily working, and if they think, oh, I'm not going to get any work in that period, you'll still get actors who are starring in Hollywood movies who will just do some guy's short film because they have a week to kill. So there's no problem with them actually turning up to be in a film they really want to be in. Gwyneth Paltrow would have been getting paid millions to star in a rom-com for a few months. She'd happily actually do something she wants to do obviously the film opens with her coughing because she's already contracted the virus unknowingly to her, and she's speaking with someone she's just had an affair with. The voice actor playing that is actually the director, Steven Soderbergh.
Oh, really?
I thought it was kind of funny, like
Yeah.
make believe that you got to bang Gwyneth Paltrow. So anyway, she gets home to Matt Damon, who gets done dirty in this movie. I felt so bad for him. Something about like he sells this character so well, because you kind of see him, you're like, this is a good guy, but he does seem like kind of a dope. I don't know if it's because he's being cheated on and he doesn't know, so he's kind of an idiot. He's the mug of the film before you've even been introduced to him. But something about him, I was just like, yeah, you would get cheated on. But I felt terrible for him because, like, this is the thing about this movie, the pacing is so quick. Like, she's coughing. Next time you see her, she's staring into a mug, like, the abyss eyes, and she's pretty much already dead. She's only dead for 5 minutes before he gets the call that his 5-year-old stepson is died.
Yeah, this scene actually really scared me, the way she drops down and then it's foaming at her mouth, because during COVID, a kind of weird similar thing happened to me. Obviously, I knew other people that got COVID, but it was kind of like cold symptoms and stuff. So you're like, just keep away from us.
Yeah,
and you'll be better. You're a healthy person. But my mum was fine the whole day. And then she comes into my room and I'm working. And she's just going, what was I in here for? What was I in here for? And I kind of turned around and was like, Mum, what are you doing? I'm going into a Zoom meeting. So I was actually a bit rude. I was like, can you leave? And then I was like, let me go and check that out. And then when I got outside that, this was just after Christmas. She's looking at a Christmas tree stand going, it wasn't Christmas, was it?
Really? Oh,
and I'm like, what? And then luckily my dad was there and we put her to like bed and we was going to her, what is your granddaughter's name? She's going, I know this. I think it's something.
Wow.
And then we called an ambulance and they like took her away. And then I was going to my dad, are you sure it's not something to do with COVID? And then they tested her and it was COVID. It's what's called that brain fog. But the way it developed from her being like remembering everything to nothing, I was like, she's having a fucking stroke. And it kind of this scene kind of like scared me from going to normal to just fucked. And like it was watching it, my heart was racing.
Because that is what it is. Like, it goes from 0 to 60 instantly. And Matt Damon, this is one of my all-time best reaction to someone dying performances. When the doctor comes out and tells him she's passed away, and he's nodding like, okay, yeah, she's dead, but can I go talk to her? Like, what's going on?
Can I go talk to her?
Mr. Amoff, I'm sorry. Your wife is dead.
I mean, I just saw her. We were just at home.
And he's just kind of like, huh? And that is that is such an accurate reaction you have when you have a shocking, unexpected loss like that, where you're just like, what? No, he's not. I just spoke to her. What are you talking? Like, no, she's not. You don't believe it nearly. You're kind of looking at them like, what are you saying that for? That's weird. Then the rage comes out.
What are you talking about? What happened to her? What happened to her?
Okay.
And I love that they went that route rather than the bursting into tears, or, you don't even really see him cry later. It's that kind of, I feel like male grief a lot of the time looks like that, where it's more kind of like irrational anger, refusal, denial, like they always say, the stages of grief. And then there's a kind of just hardened repression you go into where you're like, no, I'm not dealing with that.
Obviously the son dies, but then he's also got the other daughter. So I think...
Well, it's his stepson
yeah,
and his daughter. They obviously set it up like that because then it plays into the fact that certain genetic lines that obviously he shares with his daughter but doesn't share with his wife and his stepson, means that the wife and stepson die very quickly, but they're obviously exposed to the virus but don't actually even ever show any symptoms.
Yeah, but I don't think poor Matt Damon has time to process the grief, because he's got to go straight away to, I've got this other daughter and I've got to do my paternal duties, and it must be so fucking hard. Like,
and I love the way the actress playing the daughter, the way she played it, but also the way the child was written, because I feel like a lot of the time in films and dramas, children are put in movies nearly as just obstacles or reasons to be annoying. And she felt like a real teenager, how they would react. Obviously grief-stricken, but also helpful. in a lot of ways. You know, she wanted to stay there with the dad.
Why don't you go to your mom's?
No.
You stay in Wisconsin.
No. She doesn't need me. She's got Dan. I live here.
She was understanding a lot of the time when, you know, she couldn't see her boyfriend, but also realistically growing frustrated the longer the lockdown was going on and the longer she wasn't able to be around anyone. So Kate Winslet is a doctor who has been hired by the government through Morpheus, who's playing kind of like the head of medicine, reaction to bad stuff happening, government guy job. And she's been hired to basically go and be the boots on the ground in Minneapolis, where there's this mini outbreak happening caused by Gwyneth Paltrow's character. So she goes to meet Matt Damon and inadvertently basically tells him that there's another outbreak in Chicago because your wife went and shagged her old boyfriend. Like, it's just, his life fucking sucks. So then we follow Kate Winslet's doctor character for a while. And this is one of my favorite sequences in the film. You know, she's going around basically delivering information that to us now seems so familiar and so obvious, so commonplace, but at the time is, you know, was really detailed, in-depth information that you would get if a pandemic was happening, as we now know. You know, talking about the R number. You know, they really didn't dumb it down on any level. It was basically, it was as dumbed down as the medical experts would dumb it down in order to deliver it to the general public. It is so scientifically accurate. And I feel like it would have been entertaining even if you watched it back then, pre-pandemic, because as much as you don't know that it's authentic, you don't know how correct and accurate they were being, authenticity generally rings true. Like I feel like you would recognize it as this feels like it's authentic. This feels like this is how it would actually go down.
Yeah, I kind of wish now that I did watch this before COVID, because I was trying to envisage myself watching it, but I could just imagine myself being there like, well, this will never happen. And now, like, if you watch it after, well, it did happen.
Well, I actually tried Googling a lot of, like, Reddit forum posts or blog posts or reviews from around the time it came out. And generally, most actual film critics were kind of saying, this is so well researched, this is amazing. But anytime it was just like Joe Public talking, it was pretty much split down the middle between people saying, this is stupid, this isn't how it would go, blah, 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 to people being like, wow, this has scared me. This should be classed as a horror movie because of how scary it is, because it feels so real.
I was thinking, do you remember going back to like the pandemic and like COVID, obviously, you know, the scientists delivering the press conferences. And at the time, because we were trapped inside, the actual press conference deliveries were one of the most interesting things that we'd be doing. And like, you stay for idiot Boris Johnson's rubbish, but then you'd get to like Chris Whitty and then they'd reveal all the graphs and stuff. And that was the most interesting thing, where it'd be like, the R number is, and you'd be like...
Well, definitely for the first few weeks.
Yeah.
After that, I definitely started tapping out. But I remember the first couple where it was just Boris Johnson coming on with his hair all frazzled, looking all hot and sweaty, being like, oh, many of your grandparents are going to die and all that.
It would have been the same situation during like the world wars, where everyone would be like trapped in and they'd have the radio on, like, Germany has invaded Poland and all this. And it was just such a unique...
Except the germs weren't getting dropped by the Luftwaffe. But I know what you mean.
It was such a unique time to be alive.
Yeah, it really was.
I look at it now.
It was a Hollywood apocalypse movie come to life. So one of my favourite scenes in the whole film is when Kate Winslet goes to visit Gwyneth Paltrow's old work. And obviously everyone's a bit freaking out, like, oh, I touched one of her mugs 3 months ago. I hope I don't have it. And everyone's all scared. And she goes, nah, it's fine, it's fine. But then she realises one of the people actually picked her up from the airport. So he calls him. And this poor geezer, he's getting the bus to work. He feels like shit. He doesn't know why. And then he gets a random phone call from someone he doesn't know saying she works for the government to do with health security. And you may have come into contact with someone with a deadly virus. And he feels like shit. So he's obviously like, what the fuck? He gets off the bus. And then he's sitting at the bus stop tripping balls. And they come over to meet him and put a mask on his face. Which is another thing in this film. Is I know we later find out it's basically, you know, touching surfaces that the other person touched. That's how you pass on the virus. But no one wears a mask in this film.
No, you're right. That thing about the phone call, I'll be like, How the fuck did you'd be a bit surprised if some random like scientist called
Oh
you?
my
Because
god.
I got a call the other day and it was like one of those fraudsters. It was like, we're calling from a Curry's about an iPhone drawer, and I was like, no thanks, just hang up. I was
Yeah.
like, why are you fucking? How do you get my number?
Yeah, you'd be a super spreader, man.
But back to that about him feeling ill. I had COVID and I didn't even realise it, and this was like before it came out. And like, I went into work, Declan, and it was during like December before it came out. And I was like, I feel really rough. But I just thought I had a really bad hangover. I was speaking to like Brian, and we had like gone out for a drink the day before. And we was like, I know that we should technically be hungover, but I really feel like shit. And we couldn't go home because everyone knew that we went out drinking.
Oh, shit.
And then because I work for where I work, they came in like a couple of days later with the antibody boxes, and they like tie a thing round and take loads of blood. And they're like, yeah, you have antibodies, so you've had COVID recently. And I was like, I knew I felt like shit. So they put a mask on. We never find out whether he died or not, that guy.
I'd say he probably, I mean, I'm sure he did die.
Yeah.
Because anyone that kind of looks really sick in this film tends to die. And the death rate is about 25%. Or 20%, which makes it kind of unrealistic, partly because diseases that kill at that rate, like bird flu, that killed people at 50%. I think Ebola is more or less like a third to half of people that get it die. And that is the Hollywood-style end of civilization version of the pandemic. The reason generally those sort of viruses don't actually get very far is they literally kill people too fast to properly spread.
Oh, really? I guess what the scary thing is about the virus strain in this film and COVID in real life, for the doctors or the healthcare professionals, would be like, we've tested you for every single virus that we know about, and we just don't know what the fuck this is. Imagine how scary that is. Like,
it must be terrifying.
Because doctors would think we know everything. Like, if they don't know, they're probably like whispering to each other, like, what the fuck is this? Like,
I want you to move away from the table.
Should I call someone?
Call everyone.
Yeah, and there's probably an element of, who knows, like, is people just die? You know, there's probably I don't think you'd automatically go to, well, we better contact the World Health Organization because this must be a whole new virus that's made the leap to humans.
Because that's what the doctor said to Matt Damon in the death scene. He was like, to be honest, I don't know what this is. It could be a complication of such and such. He's like, no, she didn't have that. And like, imagine like going to tell...
Yeah, he's like, did she have syphilis?
No, herpes or something. And he's like, imagine going to tell someone that, like, she just died like that. And secondly, we don't know what it is. Sorry, like.
So obviously it's a made-up virus for the film, but it's actually based apparently on the Nipah virus from Malaysia in the late 1990s because it shares a lot of the common traits of it, but it's kind of more ramped up. And I get that like, I like the fact that wherever it makes sense to stay factual and grounded, they do in this film. But where they want to have a bit of leeway is exactly where you want it to have it. Like, for instance, you know, like I said, it has such a high kill rate and it kills people so quickly, it probably would hamper its ability to spread. But that's what makes it terrifying, is the fact that the way it cuts you down so quickly and the kind of symptoms you have, where you just go horrific colour, start having seizures, cough a little bit, and then you just start foaming at the mouth and you're dead.
Yeah, because imagine, Declan, if they made it slow killing, like, someone's in hospital for like 3 months and they finally die, you'd be sitting there like, come on, man.
Yeah.
Do you know? So they have to sensationalise it.
How gutted were you when Kate Winslet dies?
I knew that she was going to get it. I knew that someone, a big name, was going to... I know Gwyneth Paltrow does. I kind of knew when she was in the field and like going to all the different places, I was like, Kate Winslet's going to catch this. And then Laurence Fishburne's character is going to feel like really bad about it, and then I'm still gutted because she dies in the line of duty trying to help people, which is sad.
And it brings it home because you like her character, and then when she dies, because she dies really early in the film, well, not that early, probably about halfway through, but very early for her character introduction, and then you spend the rest of the film thinking anyone could die. Like, it's not, there's no one main character. Anyone in this ensemble could die and just fall out of the movie forever.
Yeah.
And it's tragic her last moment is she's in this football arena that's been co-opted and turned into a makeshift hospital, and she's just lying on a rack, and someone else is dying next to her, and she's just reaching weakly out to him, and that's the last thing before she dies. And it's really sad, and you see it the whole time. She's fighting all the douchebag government people. You know, she keeps butting heads with that fat bitch who's doing these beaches will stay open for the 4th of July routine against her. Oh, you know, whose budget's this coming out of? And she just gets taken down, and it's not heroic. She doesn't do anything cool. She just starts coughing in her hotel room, and before you know it, she's brown bread.
Yeah, and by this point, the saddest part about it is, like, in this football arena or basketball, whatever it is, all the doctors have actually left, and nuns are left caring for him. It's, like, really sad. But again, this is where this film got it factually right, because this is actually what happened. Do you remember they built this whole Florence Nightingale hospital just to deal with the COVID pandemic? It's so true what you're saying. Everything that you see on it in hindsight now, they're like, bang on, bang on, bang on.
Because there's things that they know, this is the plan that's in place. This is what they're going to do in terms of governments and plans and protocols. But then there's, what will the social reactions be like? And they get a shit ton of those right. Like, for instance, the conspiracy theorists. We have Jude Law playing, for some reason, Australian.
Yeah.
Australian conspiracy theorist blogger who ends up making millions because he starts rabbiting about this phony medicine that apparently is the miracle cure for the virus. But there's other things like, I guess they thought there'd be tons of people getting kidnapped, because we see the French actress who works for the World Health Organization that travels to China to investigate. You have her getting kidnapped by a local Chinese tribe because they're going to use her to barter for getting the vaccine straight away when it eventually is ready. And apparently we hear that there's been tons of these sort of kidnappings all over the world. So nothing like that ever happened. But other sociological things were predicted quite accurately.
Jude Law's character reminds me of that Simpsons episode where Homer becomes Mr. X. Like, the bag over his face, and you can see that, like, when it loads, it's him, but then it covers him after. And he kind of, like, makes up stories about the flu jab having, like, mind control in it, and he's sent to the island. It's kind of like Jude Law's character in it. But the social unrest in this, where they're, like, rioting and going into chemists trying to get a fake drug, it kind of made me laugh, because in America, it would be 10 times more dodgy because everyone has guns. Like, the most social unrest you saw in this country during it, it's like you go into fucking Morrison's at your set curfew time, and you'd be like, bastards are taking all the toilet paper and the pasta.
I remember when Asda had bouncers at the front because people were going mental in the queues. But yeah, it never got that bad, but then the situation wasn't that bad. But one thing that also amazed me was they predicted the boredom of being in lockdown. Because once lockdown is decided and you know, everyone's in quarantine, everyone's going to have to social distance, we see that mainly through the eyes of Matt Damon and his daughter. And most of their struggles throughout the rest of the film, other than dealing with the grief of people who have passed, is that they're bored, that the daughter's missing out on prom, she's missing out on her formative years, she can't see her little boyfriend. And her dad's keeping her in jail, like not allowing her to go out and see people. And I was amazed that, well, in a film where you feel like when you're writing that, you would worry. If I'm a script writer and like you got to keep everything interesting or whatever, and you're putting these scenes up next to each other, you have one where loads of people are dying and be put into mass graves, and then teenage girl annoyed because she can't see her boyfriend. And you could easily worry, like, that seems so silly next to this sequence, but they put it in there and they got it 100% right, because that's probably going to be a lot of people's biggest takeaway, unless they obviously lost someone near and dear to them during the pandemic recently, is the boredom, the frustration of lockdown, and you know, young people missing formative years or missing birthdays or missing their proms. Or
So instead we lose spring, we lose summer, we lose another 144 days that don't happen again.
Last school days or whatever.
I was actually quite lucky during our pandemic, because I won't say what role I do, but my job, I had to still go to work. And that was quite, it wasn't good, but it still got me out of the house, Declan, which I, in hindsight, I could never imagine being excited about going to work. I was genuinely excited about going in.
They tread the line perfectly and never slipped into melodrama, but it never felt robotic and just by the numbers either. It felt quite authentic. Like, she felt like a mature teenager. She was still going to be teenagery about it, but she was mature about it. She wasn't like being annoying, which my number one thing I hate, when kids are annoying or just cause problems in movies. You just fucking hate them.
Yeah, because they could have done it really over the top, like, let me go out, Dad, and like running off and slamming the bedroom door and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So it was perfectly done.
So speaking of, family relationships, you obviously have Morpheus he's the Chris Whitty, basically. He's the health secretary for America. And he's the guy who's, communicating with the public and going on the news. He has a point where he butts up against Jude Law. And Jude Law is obviously, he's playing a dick, conspiracy theorist, douchebag. But he has some dirt that is genuine on Morpheus, where Bryan Cranston, who plays a general, let him in early on the information that they were about to go into lockdown. A lot more dramatic than our lockdowns. It was, a lot of army on the borders and the kind of stuff that you'd see fake WhatsApp messages going around warning you about, but actually for real. And he warned his girlfriend before he's supposed to.
Yeah.
Or his wife, I'm not sure what she is, but she's something to. And basically, somewhere or another, Jude Law knows about this because his girlfriend went on to warn her friend. As a result, he gets removed from press duties, and there's going to be, they can't replace him, so they don't get rid of him, but he's going to be basically trialed and possibly go to prison after all is said and done with the pandemic. So he's fucked, basically. And it's interesting because he then goes on again to lie in order to get vaccines early for his wife and the janitor, who he has an ongoing relationship, and the janitor's son. And it's interesting because, it's played by Laurence Fishburne, who you fucking love. The film language of it basically says to you, he did the right thing, you would do the same. But it is interesting seeing it in the aftermath of the Covid-19 pandemic, where you had so many different politicians resign or become disgraced due to doing similar things, where you would never look at it as like, hey, did what he had to do. Now, I know he was doing it to save his wife or get her out of town or so they could be together, or he was, getting a vaccine for someone before necessarily they were in line to. It's not the same as, going to your other house in Windermere in the Lake District because you're bored and you don't want to follow the own rules you set. But what did you think of that? Because it's interesting seeing that where it was portrayed in a very understanding light.
Yeah, I mean, what they did get right about this, another aspect they got right is, although Jude Law's character was very annoying in this story.
Really, I loved it.
I don't know why he's Australian as well. Like, it's just so stupid. They got right the whole financial aspect of it, of people benefiting financially from it, which is what happened in this country with well-known people from the Conservative Party selling the vaccine patents to their friends, essentially, so they could make a bomb out of it.
Yeah.
They got that spot on again.
One scene I thought was interesting for the Jude Law character is when a journalist he previously knows shows up at his door, sick and desperate and believing his nonsense he's peddling about this antidote. And she's begging for some. And by this point, the world's, looking really fucked up. No one's on the street. There's loads of rubbish everywhere. Civilization seems to be sort of teetering on the verge of collapse. Jude Law's going around with a fishbowl on his head. Everything's fucked. And she turns up at his door, like begging for help. And he says, I'll get some, go home. I'll bring some over to you when I have it. And I thought he was just fobbing her off to get rid of her. But then later you see he actually does drop by her home and finds out she's already dead. And that got me thinking, does he believe it? Does he believe his own bullshit? A journalist believing it is extra helpful to his cause because she's a legitimate journalist and she might talk about it?
My opinion on this, I think he genuinely believes it.
Yeah.
Because you remember, he's filming himself, like, sweating. But he's like, if I'm alive tomorrow, this is true. I think he genuinely does believe it. Or maybe his ego is so big that he just believes his own bullshit.
Because the more you lie, you do kind of start believing the lie in a weird way. But one thing that made me think he doesn't believe it and he is being cynical is the way he looks at the poster that says basically RIP, indicates that she's died. It's cold and calculating. It didn't seem like there's any real personal impact about the fact that she's died, even though he, maybe not had a friendship, but had a working relationship at least with this person. And he doesn't seem to give a fuck.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just good acting. Again, this is a film about nuanced performances. It's not about over-dramatic, let me try and win the Oscar with this scene, I'm going to break down and cry. So, I don't know, but it's interesting. It got me thinking, does he believe it? Does he believe his own bullshit?
Yeah, going back to Laurence Fishburne, there's just certain actors that I just can't see as any other characters. Yeah. I'm just like...
I've literally only referred to him as Morpheus.
Yeah, automatically I see him as Morpheus, and I'm like, imagine if he actually was Morpheus. Like, with the sunglasses and...
So to Kate Winslet, you are the one.
No, take the blue pill or the red pill.
The blue vaccine or the red vaccine.
It's the Matrix the whole time, viewers. But yeah. Where do you get that fucking ham sack suit from as well? Jude Law's character, or does he just fashion it himself?
I mean, it did not look like he bought it from a fucking industrial level thing. It looks like he threw it together.
Do you remember back to our little pandemic? Do you remember the WhatsApp message of like you start reading it and it's like I remember on a train looking at it, it's like martial law will come into effect and like shit, and you read down and it goes to the army are making the world's biggest lasagna the size of Wembley Stadium.
Yeah, I fucking hated that.
And there was another video of literally like Jude Law's character from this. It's a woman that had gone into like Tesco's and someone's filming it from her window and she's made like a whole suit of like Tesco bags and like a little hat and I'm like, this country, man, it just cracked me up.
So of course the whole time that we also see a scientist who is trying to figure out the vaccine the whole time, and these were some of my tensest scenes. Watching it a second time, I know nothing's going to happen, but the moments where they're in their big sort of industrial hazmat suits and they're in the labs with the viruses. And I felt like there was going to be a moment where one of them has a rip or something. Because you think, I don't care if I'm completely in this human-sized marigold glove, walking around with a helmet on. I do not want to be in the room with that shit.
This is the bit where I found the film was a bit sensationalized with like you see the woman sweeping another dead monkey into a bag and it's like all the monkeys are dying and then she goes on to inject herself with one of the vaccines and you're like, I'm sorry, but no one's ever going to do this. And then she goes to see her dad who's also conveniently a doctor who's called it for staying on to treat his beloved patients, and she takes her mask off and I'm testing the vaccine and he's like, you want this Nobel Prize, don't you? And I'm like, oh God, this is a bit silly.
Fair enough, but I loved that scene. And I loved it, first of all, for the fact that her dad got a shout out. Poetically, for the character, it was beautiful. Because, this isn't a film that's big on character. It's not interested in it. And a lot of the characters are nearly at times just kind of a person to fill a role to nearly educate you about what would happen. But this is a moment where you do get lovely characterization and you get an insight into her life and her relationship with her father. And you assume she obviously looks up to her father, and that's probably why she became a doctor or a scientist. And it's good that, you see a lot of things of doctors and nurses walking out because it's so dangerous and things falling apart. But I like the fact that you did get a shout out towards someone, a doctor or medical staff who was stayed there and did risk their life, because we saw an awful lot of that in real life. So that's great.
Yeah.
Also, there is apparently a big history, not so much in modern times, but a big history of scientists and doctors doing self-testing. It's very difficult to find test subjects and very difficult to have the facilities or have this set up in a way that you can do it all properly. And especially in the modern era, everything's so regulated, and as it should be. Apparently Moderna actually isolated the virus and started working on more or less having the vaccine sort of ready to test early 2020. But it was then 2 years or so of hardcore testing. And even then, it was fast-tracked in a big way. So this movie doesn't feature any testing period for the vaccine, which is really unrealistic and stupid. And I feel like they could have done it because it could easily have just skipped on 2 years.
Yeah. And
it wouldn't have changed the plot or the pace. But they don't, and that's one thing they got wrong. Let's not be harsh, they got so much right. As dumb as it was that they had that kind of heroic moment, I thought, you're so in the black, you've earned so much credit when it when it comes to being authentic and realistic, have this poetic moment with this character. That's fine. Go ahead.
What bit made me laugh as well is the way they chose to like draw who would get the vaccine first. It's like a fucking proper like lottery wheel, and they're like, March 31st is going to get the vaccine first. Like, do you know what I mean? They drew it out on birth dates.
Well,
like,
it's actually quite clever because, firstly, it's a very visual way where you can represent that the vaccine is getting, only given to a certain amount of people, but in a very kind of visual, cinematic way. But also, it has a precedent in history again. That is actually genuinely how they used to announce conscriptions to the draft during the Vietnam War.
Really?
So again, they've taken something from history that has a precedent and makes a lot of sense. Now, it's not at all how you do it in modern days, but who knows, it's very easy to do it all online and text messages nowadays, but maybe even 10 years ago, back in 2011, maybe they would have needed a simpler way to get that information out there immediately. The final scene shows Matt Damon and his daughter, not as things are totally wide open again, but as things are slowly going back to normal. And it shows her and her little boyfriend who's finally got the vaccine having their little, not quite prom, but their own little prom, first dance in the living room together. Again, amazing that, there was no end of deep impact. The president saying, we'll rebuild, everything's great, don't worry. There was no it's over moment. It was, things are start to go back to normal, but it's going to take a long time. But here's the first glimmer of hope, and here's the first little normal thing you can do again, which again rings so true with all our experiences over the past couple of years.
I didn't care for it because I'm an old, sad man with a cold heart. But I don't know. Out of all the ways they could have ended the film, I guess it was quite nice, especially the way it also cuts to Matt Damon's character looking at the camera with old pictures of Gwyneth Paltrow and the daughter. Yeah, she's a bitch, and the daughter screaming up, "Are you coming, Dad, to see us?" And he's like, just finding the camera. It was nice, but I'm just a cold man. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Speaking
of cold, Gwyneth Paltrow's autopsy scene, and to be honest, all the main character death scenes, you don't see the scene; they're just kind of dead, and it will cut to it very abruptly. You would very abruptly see Kate Winslet having a zip over her face in a body bag. You very abruptly cut to Gwyneth Paltrow having an autopsy done as her scalp is taken off and her face peeled over her face and her brain inspected. And it really disturbed me because there was something about the absolute lack of emotion about how they directed those moments. It just cuts to it so abruptly. I found it really disturbing. It really hit home with the sense that 1 minute you're there, going about your life, hugging your kids, having an affair. The next second, you're just a piece of meat on a table getting cut up like a roast chicken. And it disturbed me. Even though you don't see the death, you just see the aftermath. It hit home more than a lot of death scenes in films.
I wonder what, in this scene, because remember when they pulled back a scalp or whatever, and he was like, should I take a sample? And the kind of lead doctor to the assistant was like, step away. And then the assistant's like, should I call someone? And he goes, call everyone. I wonder what they kind of saw in the brain to
I think it was a giant virus bobbing about in her head.
Oh, do you think that's what it is? No.
Do you know what? Again, here's a moment where maybe they had a bit of poetic license to inject a little bit of drama into the sense of urgency into the movie.
Because obviously, she's dead, so the brain activity would be non-existent by this point. But anyway, there's that scene kind of hit it home to me. There's two other scenes that hit it home as well. There's obviously dead bodies lying in the street, and it was we ran out of body bags 2 weeks ago or something. And the last scene is when Matt Damon sees them going into his neighbour's house, and you see the gunshots going off, and he calls the police, and they're like, due to waiting times, press 1 to report a dead body, and all this shit. I was like, fuck that.
Obviously, years from now, there's going to be a shitload of COVID movies coming out, and it got me thinking, how will you do it? Because in one sense, any film that happens to be set in this era, a lot of other interesting shit's going on right now. There's a war in Ukraine. There's the craziest presidency in modern history in America. There's a lot of things that are going to have films made out of them that will just by extension, have to be COVID films. There's the way we saw TV series and movies during the COVID pandemic where some decided to pretend it didn't exist, some incorporated it. What do you think it's going to be like? Because I'd imagine you'll have the big all-star 3-hour epic that tries to tell the whole global story, kind of like Contagion, but you'll probably have a lot of smaller films, maybe even independent films, set, maybe a couple that are forced into lockdown and end up breaking up or getting back together. There's kind of like an endless possibility of it. Or do you think maybe people won't have an appetite for it and Hollywood will steer away from it altogether?
It's a very good question, actually, Declan. I can see it going either two ways, and you've covered both of them for me. I can't see the.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. I don't think I can see that 3-hour thing, which you said, because I think that would just be too much for people to digest in one go, and people will just lose concentration in that or interest in that. I think they'll do it and it will be like a British hit of and win BAFTAs and stuff. I could kind of see a Paddy Constantine type thing where it's just a guy and the COVID pandemic hits and everything goes wrong for him and all his relationships break down and his beloved granddad dies and he can't see him in hospital and then he ends up suicidal and depressed, and it will be one of those type of films, like a classic British film.
Or the opposite, kind of a grumpy old man ends up coming out of his shell and becoming friendly with all his neighbours because a nice young girl comes over and does his shopping for him, and his cold Grinch heart softens and grows 5 sizes, and there's an endless thing. But I think many years from now, no one wants to hear about this. It took years for people to start making 9/11 films. And that was one event that happened in America, but sent shockwaves around the world. This had nowhere to send the shockwaves because it was happening everywhere for years. So in one sense, it's fascinating because there'll be so many countless millions of individual interesting stories that came out of it. But will there be an appetite for hearing about it? I think people will want escapism. It'll be a long time before they'll start making these films en masse.
I reckon they'll do it, Declan, through the eyes of a NHS nurse or something, all stressed out and frazzled and unappreciated. I can see that more of a TV drama rather than a whole film.
Do you know what? I don't know why that never occurred to me. Of course, that'd be way more interesting.
Yeah, I reckon they'll do it like that.
The last thing that will probably be the biggest issue for it is being able to do it authentically. If you were to do the big global astronauts eye view of the whole thing going on, how could a big budget movie in Hollywood try and tell the reality of the Chinese part of it, incompetency with the regime or whatever way you want to look at it, when every single big movie has to kowtow to China out of fear of losing out on that huge market? We see this all the time now where Hollywood and studios will allow their films to be censored of any gay parts or anything that the Chinese government doesn't like in order to get the movie into that market, and they'll sell their soul. Recently, you've seen Disney with their new animated film Strange Things, for whatever reason, has actually maybe grown some balls, or maybe there's something else to do with it, maybe more cynical, but they've decided to just not bring it into those markets, the Chinese market or some Middle Eastern markets, because they don't want to them unsavory parts of the film to be censored, which I say bravo to them. Whether it's cynical or genuine, I support that 100%. Please, more of that. Stop kowtowing to those forces. But yeah, it's difficult to see a film truly telling that part of the story accurately without fear of being hit economically.
I can sum it up easily. Do you want to tell the truth or do you want more fucking money? It's the answer to the question. You can't do a COVID story without criticising China. It's impossible.
Well, you can criticise anyone, but China, yeah. Obviously, we've talked about this film in retrospect. Has come to be absolutely so accurate and so prophetic. What other films, disaster films, say if we do get invaded by aliens, say if there is an asteroid impact, what other films do you reckon will be looked back at? Wow, they got it so right.
It's hard to actually say because I'm going to listen to disaster films, and the previous ones have been deliberately so Hollywood. I can't, like Armageddon. If an astronaut's coming to Earth and going to explode Earth, like no one gives a shit about these astronauts. You're just like, let's be honest, you're going to be like, oh, they're good people, but if they die, they die. I want to live.
Well, one thing you're definitely not going to do, you're not going to be like, all right, we've only got a year before the asteroid hits. Don't worry about those astronauts we already trained. Let's find some miners who work on oil rigs and train them to be astronauts. You'd be like, what?
And also, got the other one that I can't. Let me go back. I actually like Armageddon. It's like,
I love
it's like
Armageddon.
one of those films.
That's
like,
not the question, though.
Yeah, okay. And obviously another one is Day After Tomorrow. That was just so ridiculous.
Yeah, climate change kicks in so quickly that the ice chases you down corridors.
Yeah. You're like walking in New York and all of a sudden, bang, you're frozen.
One that Waterworld as well.
Waterworld.
Up until 60 million years ago, supposedly the ice caps had never even frozen solid. So the idea that when they melt, every single bit of land will be below sea level is completely impossible. But, some ones that I think do get it right, Don't Look Up, I feel like that is, although obviously done through a comedic lens, probably pretty accurate in a lot of ways of how the world would react.
There's another film which I actually quite like. Have you heard of Seeking a Friend for the End of the World? The plot is an asteroid is going to hit the Earth. But the difference between this is they don't send miners to space. They've just accepted that they're going to die. And they've got a certain time frame on Earth. And it's just like them getting to know each other and accepting they're going to die. And just... It's not corny either. It's like, it's well done. It's a very good film. What would you do if all of a sudden it was like Don't Look Up and it's definitely going to be the end of the world and you've got, I'm not going to say 24 hours because that's too short. Like, what would you do? You have a week. What would you do?
To be honest, I think I would completely snap and go crazy.
Yeah.
Did you want me to say something fun?
No, I would like. Oh no, I'll say something for the premise of we are a film show. You have a week left to live. What films are you watching before you die?
1 to 7 Police Academy.
Oh yeah, you need a laugh. Yeah, you need a laugh.
I was just trying to think of something with 7 films.
I definitely watch. I reckon the film I watch before I die, my last ever film, as the asteroid is coming in, I would like to watch again Once Upon a Time in the West.
Yeah.
And just like as it explodes, just the last scene, and then I'm gone. I do totally recommend it, and I especially probably recommend it even more now that we've gone through COVID, simply because how accurate it actually turned out to be. If you had a very bad experience of COVID for whatever reason, the lockdown was difficult for you, or stuff did happen, it might be a difficult watch if you haven't seen it. But for me, simply because of the fact of the stuff, so many things they actually got right, I recommend it on that premise. It was eerily accurate.
Yeah, I 100% recommend this film. It's a very unique film. You have an apocalypse movie where civilization never actually collapses, which is something you don't usually see. You also see a big budget Hollywood film with an all-star cast, which its main focus is being as scientifically accurate as possible. That's two things you never really see, and for that reason alone, it's worth checking out. So easy recommendation for Contagion. See you next week.
This is the Filmy McFilm Film Show.